And if you're staying in here, open to John chapter 11. John chapter 11. Thank you, deacons, for serving. Thank you, orchestra, choir, musicians, handbells, for making our worship so wonderful this morning. John chapter 11 is where we'll pick up reading in just a moment. All the gospel writers tell us that as Jesus is approaching Jerusalem in the last week of his life, he knows the fate to which he goes. And he is greeted by crowds and crowds of people who apparently had come out to meet him as he's entering Jerusalem. And they're shouting, Hosanna, and there's excitement. The crowd is electric. But none of the gospel writers really tell us the reason for why all these people are suddenly so compelled to go out to Jesus and why there's such a stir at this moment as Jesus enters Jerusalem. Except John. John gives us the explanation for why. For why at this moment the crowd was electrified with excitement. It's because Jesus had recently performed a sign, a miracle that was so public, so amazing, so undeniable that nobody could keep quiet about it. Jesus had raised a man from the dead after he had been in the tomb for 4 days. And he did it right outside of Jerusalem in front of a crowd of mourners who had come to see. The news about this spread like wildfire. All of these people start believing that this Jesus who raised Lazarus from the dead was the Messiah. In fact, this causes such a stir that the Jewish leaders were looking for Jesus to arrest him. And John says that from that time on, Jesus no longer moved about publicly with his disciples. Until finally the Passover festival was getting close. And John says that people are looking for Jesus and saying to one another, isn't he coming to the festival? Surely he'll be here. Is he here? No, he's not here yet. And then John says that when the great crowd of people who were there for the Passover heard that Jesus was entering the city, they went out to meet him because they had heard about this sign. Ironically, raising Lazarus from the dead, this incredible miracle was the turning point which would lead to his own death. It turns out Jesus knew that in raising his friend, he was sealing his own fate. There's no way, given the popularity and the following that he would gather after doing something like that, there's no way that he could avoid confrontation with the religious leaders. He knew they would be seeking to kill him, which is why he didn't move about publicly until he was ready. And this is the point in Jesus' ministry. You see, the sign where he comes to Bethany to raise Lazarus, that's the point in Jesus' ministry where he decides to reveal himself, who he is, so definitively and so publicly that no one would have any doubt about who he claimed to be. In fact, what we discover in the course of this story is that Jesus actually engineers the circumstances, so to speak, of the miracle. See, he sets the miracle up so that it's even more amazing, a miracle so indisputable that it would force the hand of those who stubbornly refused to see who Jesus really was. And it would, in the end, lead to his own death. And it all started with a message that Jesus received one day from his dear friend in Bethany, his friends Mary and Martha and Lazarus. Bethany's near Jerusalem. Jesus isn't very close to that spot, so they sent him a message that his friend Lazarus is sick. Mary and Martha and their brother Lazarus were obviously very close friends of Jesus because the message is simply this: the one that you love is sick. That's all they say. The one you love is sick. That's all they had to say, and Jesus knew. It's weird, though, that being loved by Jesus didn't keep Lazarus from getting sick. The one you love is sick. Well, I thought if Jesus loved me, I'd never get sick. No. The one you love is sick. Being loved by Jesus didn't keep him from getting sick, but keep reading, and we find out that Jesus does something surprising here. Verse 3 is where he gets the message. So John 11, verse 3. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. When he heard this, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. Do you notice that John pauses there in between narrating the events of the story and gives us a little editorial comment? Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Why does he tell us this? Why reiterate this point? We already have this information, really, don't we? Why repeat what we already know from the message that was sent, that Jesus loves them? It seems that John is saying this, is repeating this for us because in light of what happens next, quite simply, it doesn't look like Jesus loved them. It doesn't feel like Jesus loved them when it says he stayed where he was 2 more days. You might doubt Jesus' love when you see that he doesn't go directly to help Lazarus. You might doubt Jesus' love when you find out that Jesus delayed, that Jesus was going to show up late, but late on purpose. And when God is late, we doubt God's love. We say, "Why didn't you show up? Why didn't you intervene? Why weren't you here?" And John wants us to have this category of knowing that God's love and God's timing are not at odds. Sometimes God delays, but the delay is not because a lack of love. In fact, the delay is not even in spite of his love. The delay is because of his love. You might have a different translation here in verse 6. It might say something like, Jesus loved them, yet when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was. Yet when he heard. That translation implies that John is saying Jesus loved them even though he stayed 2 more days. But John actually uses the word therefore. Therefore, it's very strong to connect these 2 things. Jesus loved them, therefore he stayed where he was 2 more days. Jesus delayed not in spite of his love, but because of his love. How is that possible? John is saying somehow in this, in our delays, in every delay, it's because of his love. Every delay has a loving purpose. We're able to see this sometimes, actually. You might have a story of some delay in your life that was frustrating at the time, but turned out to be a good thing later. It's easy to look at the delay, though, at an unanswered prayer, at a delay, God's not showing up, and judge God's love based on what we know of our circumstances. It's much harder to look at the delay and instead judge our circumstances and what we see around us in light of what we know of Jesus' love. That's harder. But for now, John just wants us to hold these things together. Jesus' timing is not at odds with his love. So after 2 days, Jesus says, let's go see Lazarus. And we'll pick it up in verse 11. After he had said this, he went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up. His disciples replied, Lord, if he sleeps, he'll get better. And Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake, I'm glad I was not there so that you may believe. But let us go to him. So this is the kind of thing that no one would invent or make up. Jesus saying, I'm glad I was not there for your sake. I'm glad I wasn't there to keep my friend from going through the suffering of death and his sisters watching him die. I'm glad I was not there. Who would make that up? It sounds so harsh, but he says, it's for your sake. I'm doing this for your sake. Jesus is allowing these circumstances purposefully so that Lazarus would die and so that this miracle would be possible. In fact, it seems like Jesus is waiting the 2 days for Lazarus to die before he goes back. When Jesus says this sickness will not end in death, it seems like Lazarus is still living when he says that. But then after 2 days, Jesus says, let's go back because Lazarus has now died. It seems like Jesus was purposefully staying put until the circumstances were prepared for Jesus to perform precisely this miracle. Why? For your sake. Not just his disciples' sake, for your sake, for my sake, for our sake. Why? For the sake of every parent who's ever buried a child, for the sake of every husband or wife who's ever buried a spouse, for the sake of every child who's ever buried a parent way too early, for the sake of every friend who's buried a friend, for the sake of anyone who's ever had to face death. For your sake, Jesus delayed and set the stage for this sign. And then we find out in verse 17 that Jesus arrives and Lazarus has been in the tomb for 4 days. And what this tells us is that, in fact, even if Jesus had come immediately when he received the message, Lazarus would still have been dead 2 days. And so there's a little bit of a question as to why the extra 2 days mattered to Jesus. And one of the things that we know about death in this culture and death in the ancient world in general is that there was a belief that the soul hovered over the body for apparently 3 days. Now, you can see where this comes in. We know this from some later writings. It's a commentary on Leviticus that's written not too long after the first century that tells us about this kind of superstitious belief that the spirit of somebody would hover over the body for 3 days after they died, and then it would depart as soon as it sees the appearance of the body change. That is, as soon as decomposition has set in, then the spirit departs and death is irreversible. Now, the reason I think for this superstition is clear enough, because we know there were some cases where people thought someone was dead. You might think someone was dead, perhaps very little breathing, and there were known cases of a body being taken to be placed in a tomb, and then they wake up, and it's like, oh, they're not dead after all. We know this happens, and that can happen because there weren't doctors examining bodies like we have today, all of that. In fact, we have evidence of this same sort of thing happening in modern times, even in living memory. So you can see why this superstition would have been there. Some people wake up after they're apparently dead. And the point is that either way, Lazarus would have been dead by the time Jesus got there. But by waiting the 2 extra days, the kind of miracle that Jesus would perform would be indisputable. 4 days in a tomb, body decomposing. Decomposition would already have progressed quite a bit in 4 days. And it would be beyond anything that anyone could deny. And so on his arrival, verse 17, it says, on his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. We don't know why. It doesn't say that Mary is angry with Jesus that he didn't come. Some people think that they read that in here. Maybe, maybe not. But Mary stayed home. Martha comes out. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. If you had been here. I mean, Martha says exactly the thing that we would expect her to say. If you had been here, my brother would not have died. God, if you had showed up, my loved one would not have died. But you didn't. Why didn't you come? Mary and Martha had waited, and they had watched for Jesus, and they had sent a message, I think, in hopes that he might come. And then they had watched Lazarus die, and then perhaps still thinking Jesus might even show up after he had died. But no, Martha, Mary, it's time to bury your brother. It's time. We've got to bury him. But I thought he would come. No, and they had the funeral, and Jesus missed all of it. Now, in the midst of this, to Martha's credit, she still expresses faith. She says, but I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. I know something. I'm still holding on to confidence in Jesus because I believe Jesus isn't finished yet. Now, does that mean that she knew Jesus is about to raise her brother? No, I don't think so. Because later when Jesus tells him to open the tomb, Martha says, don't do it. It'll smell terrible. So I don't think she knows what to expect here, but she knows somehow this is not the end of the story. And then verse 23, Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha kind of misunderstands this. Your brother will rise again. Jesus, this could be like, hey, the reminder of the sweet by and by, something people say. Martha thinks that he's speaking of the far off future. She thinks that Jesus is just giving her assurance about heaven one day, that, which is not empty assurance, but is not perhaps what Martha was hoping for. And Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. So she kind of has this, I know about the final day, but Jesus, I wanted you to change today. I wanted you to get here so we didn't have to wait for the last day. And what comes next is so incredible. It's as if Jesus is saying, I'm not here to give you a sermon. I'm not here to give you a theology lesson about the end. I'm not asking you to wait for the final day. He says something here that would be incomprehensible if anyone else were to say it. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. I am the resurrection and the life. Can you imagine someone looking into the face of a woman who just lost her brother, is grieving, and say, I'm the resurrection and the life? Jesus is trying to make all this about him? What? She just lost her brother. You're making it about you. Yeah. I'm the resurrection and the life. You're looking at resurrection personified, life personified. Martha was speaking about a future hope. Martha was clinging to faith in a far off day of resurrection. And Jesus changes the tense or the verb and says, I am. All of your future hopes, all of that you've got laid out there for the future, it's present right now in me because it's all hope in me. I am the living embodiment of everything that you're hoping for in the future. I'm here right now. Listen to what he says. I'm the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Do you believe this? Do you believe that I'm the life? So much so that believing in me means you live even through death? Can you see that to come alive by believing in me means that you will not face death the way that other people might face death without me? I don't think you can actually get much clearer than this about this issue. I don't think Jesus could have said it any more plainly than this. You'll live even though you die. That the end of life is not the end, but the beginning. We do not journey in life towards the sunset, but towards the sunrise. This is not the land of the living, really. This is the land of the dying. And the only way out is through death. But death in Christ is just the gate into life for those who trust in the resurrection and the life. To believe in Jesus means to accept all this, to embrace all this, to accept that everything Jesus said about himself was absolutely true. Why would we believe that? Because he proved it. To believe it despite what we see or don't see, or despite how God has shown up or not shown up for us in our life, and despite the suffering that we see or experience in this world, Jesus says, do you believe this? Will you stake your heart and your soul? Will you stake all of your life upon it in perfect trust? And if you have, then in the most real sense, you're not on the way to death, you are on your way to life. And Martha musters all her faith. She says, yes, Lord. In verse 27, yes, Lord, she replied, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. And after she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, and is asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. And when the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. And then in this extraordinarily tender moment, John records something for us that is astonishing because it essentially has no bearing on the actual miracle that's about to take place. And what's even more amazing is that Jesus pauses in this moment knowing full well what he was about to do. Jesus knew exactly what was about to transpire. Jesus knew that he was going to raise Lazarus. And yet John records something for us that helps us understand that whenever you're faced with the thing that you say, God could have prevented this, he should have prevented this, and yet chose not to, John records this so that we would know it's not because he's absent, and it's not because he doesn't care, and it's not because of a lack of love. In a moment of divine empathy, Jesus enters into the emotion of Mary and Martha and weeps. Verse 35 simply says, Jesus wept. It is the shortest verse in Scripture, but not any less powerful for being so. He could have said, don't cry. He could have. He could have said, just wait and see what I'm about to do. You don't have to cry right now. He could have said, there's no need for that. I'm going to change this thing into a whole celebration. Just wait. But he didn't do that. Instead, it's like he leans into the world, our world, and says, I know. I know. And it's as though John wanted us to know, just in case you were wondering, you may not see the tears, you may not feel the empathy, but I was there and I saw it, and he cares for you, even knowing what the resolution will be. And your situation and struggles might be resolved in the very near future, who knows, or in the far future, I don't know. God surely knows even now how he's going to answer your prayer in his own time. But even knowing that, God is still able to grieve with you now in the midst of delay. Don't miss the fact that this story goes all the way through the cycle of loss and all the way through, illness and death and all the way to the final resolution of the story where Lazarus is raised, all the way to resurrection. So it's like a microcosm of the whole story. And in between, we have all the things. We have the experience of loss, and we have the unanswered prayer, like the message that, Jesus delays in answering, and they're trying to make sense of the delay. There's some waiting. There's the expression of faith anyway from Martha. There's the whole experience of what we experience in our lives as we wrestle with the goodness of God and the pain in the world. It's like the story condenses that entire experience down into a few days. But don't miss this, that in the middle of all of it are the tears of God. In the middle of all of it are the tears of God. And the Jews said, see how he loved him. See how he loved. But some of them said, couldn't he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Good question. And Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there's a bad odor, for he's been there for 4 days. Then Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So they took away the stone, and then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. This is great. I love this prayer. God, you and I know what's about to happen. They don't. So I'm saying this for their sake. It's time to show them that they might believe that you sent me. And when he has said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. And the dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and cloth around his face. And Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." You know why Jesus had to tell them to take off the grave clothes? Because when a corpse steps out of a grave, people take a step back. Nobody was making a move towards Lazarus right then. Nobody. Corpse comes out of a tomb, everybody goes like this. Whoa. And Jesus is like, he's alive. You just take the grave clothes off. Come on, let him go. Can you imagine the perspective that Mary and Martha had after this when it came to suffering in life? Can you imagine? When we struggle to make sense of the pain in the world, this week, we struggle to make sense of a shooting at an elementary school. And we ask, why doesn't God do something about that? Mary and Martha would just say, we don't know. But here's what we do know. Because of one day in Bethany with Jesus, what we do know is that sometimes he waits. And in the meantime, he weeps. Sometimes he waits. In the meantime, he weeps with us. And never at any moment did he stop loving us. Why doesn't God do something about your situation? Your unanswered prayer? I don't know. But I know sometimes he waits. And I know in the meantime, he weeps with us. And never at any moment does he stop loving us. What a Savior. The Lord of life would conquer death by dying. He would destroy sin by becoming the curse for us. He would triumph over the grave by being placed in a grave. Resurrection and life had come to die for you and me so that we all might look and say, see how he loves you. He never stopped. See how he loves you. See how he loves you. See how he loves you and me. Let's pray.